Welcome to Crossroads and Cauldrons. We are two witches with jobs, families, and busy lives just like you. We talk about weaving the web of community, practicing magic, and life in the Deep South. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Selena, and you're listening to Crossroads and Cauldrons podcast. We have a special guest that I have been hoping to get on the show and attempting to get on the show for several weeks now. So he's here, finally, the long-awaited Nicholas Pearson. Welcome to the show, Nicholas.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this.
I've been dangling you like a proverbial carrot for my listeners for weeks now. Every show I'm like, he's coming, it's happening. So I'm sure they're as excited as I am that you're here. For those of you who don't know who Nicholas is, I will give a brief introduction. Nicholas has been immersed in all aspects of the mineral kingdom for over 20 years. He's been teaching crystal workshops since high school and studied mineral science at the Stetson University's Gillespie Museum. He is a certified teacher of Usui Reiki. He teaches crystal and Reiki classes throughout the United States, and he's the author of 7 Archetypal Stones, Crystal Basics, Crystals for Karmic Healing, Stones of the Goddess, Crystal Healing for the Heart. There's more. So you can see a little bit of a trend here. We've got a lot of work about crystals, which later in the show, we're going to sort of flip that on its head with your latest book. But for now, let's talk about it. How did you get... what brought you to your deep love of working with crystals and minerals?
I mean, it definitely starts in childhood. You know, that kind of universal urge that kids have to pick up rocks. Mine never went away. So to this day, I can be like walking through a shopping mall parking lot and go, oh, look at this lovely piece of granite gravel, and just finds its way into my pocket. But at some point in my childhood, that began to evolve and grow, getting the chance to, fill up the little pouches with tumbled stones on family vacations. And eventually it culminated in my grandfather giving me a piece of quartz, which is still near and dear to my heart to this day. I actually have it right beside me. I still have the same crystal.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, like, rock wasn't just this inert part of my environment. It was something luminous and magical. I mean, how can you look at a crystal, whether it's quartz or calcite or any other mineral, but look at the regularity and everything else about it and not think that there's something special to it? And I just fell in love. So it's just kind of been the thing I've had going on in the background for many years of my life until I took the deep dive and made it the focus of what I do.
I think I'll say everyone I know absolutely has that fascination in childhood with stones, with picking up rocks. I remember I have many nieces and nephews, but my oldest niece, who's almost 18, I don't want to talk about it. She, when she was a toddler, she would pick up little rocks and give them to me whenever I came to visit. And I had put them on a little charm bracelet, and I just wore it around, all these little stones that she found to be absolutely precious for whatever reason, and gave them to me. And of course, I clean out handfuls of rocks from my children's pockets on laundry day. But on the other side of that, a lot of people that come to witchcraft and paganism, that's kind of their gateway, is a fascination with crystals and stones. And I think that goes beyond, they're pretty and they're interesting. I think there's something that draws us back to the earth. And just that structure, that order, we're drawn to that. What do you think that is? Why do we do that?
It's such a primal, universal thing. Just earlier this year, there was this really great piece that was published about a new archaeological discovery in the Kalahari Desert in South Africa. And it was a find inside a stone shelter of calcite crystals, white rhombohedral calcite crystals that date back to about 105,000 years ago. They were placed there. Experts believe they had some sort of religious or spiritual significance. We can't know exactly what. Obviously, people didn't leave us an instruction manual. There was, no little plaque underneath that said, here's why we left these rocks here. But it just it exemplifies that this is a really, really universal human urge to find meaning and connection with the world around us. Some of us do that with rocks. Some of us do that with plants. Some of us do that with color or clouds or anything. And that sort of kinship that we feel with the natural world, I think, is what draws many of us into the witchier and more pagan flavored paths, because we want to explore that relationship, and we want to, in some cases, work more deeply with it and partner with it for our spiritual growth, or for our healing, or maybe for the betterment of the world.
I think you're touching on something very, very lightly that's very, very profound, because so much of our culture is based around separation from nature, separation from the divine. Like, the material world is not related in any way to the divine. And I think part of what draws people into paganism and sort of any earth based sort of spirituality is reconnection with the truth that the divine is in nature and within us and around us. And how can we recognize that divine spark, if not by observing what we find around us, you know as it's reflected within us as well.
Oh
And I
yeah.
think that's why people have such a feeling of resonance, I guess is the right word, when dealing with rocks and crystals. And I think, I don't know, for myself, I had difficulty connecting with rocks on a spiritual level, like when I was a child, absolutely. But then there was this break when I was first practicing. You get a crystal in your hand and you're like, that's pretty, but there it is. And it took me a lot of unraveling, um I guess, some blocks that I had built up about, what's real and what's not real and what matters, before I could actually have a conversation with stones and mineral allies and things like that. Have you found that to be true in your practice and your experience teaching, working with crystals?
I think we're all kind of wired a little bit differently. And so we're definitely predisposed to kind of working with the skill set that feels most comfortable, most ingrained within us. Real early on, that kind of inherent magic or force or consciousness within stones required no help to tap into. It was just like I could hold it and find that stillness, and there it was, clearly and reverently, just making itself known. And it's actually, I've found in the last few years, I've kind of hit a roadblock that has never existed for me before, where I just get so cerebral about it, that it's hard for me to switch gears. It's not that I can't, it's that I've gotten so entrenched in the world of writing and teaching and planning curriculum and doing research above and beyond what we normally do in the kind of woo-woo space, to look at, the science behind all of this and the anthropology and archaeology behind all of this, that sometimes I just get stuck there, that I forget to have the raw experience. And so one of my big practices this year is making space for the personal, making space for wonder and awe. And sometimes that looks like sitting down with a beautiful mineral specimen and the best light I have, and just going, oh my gosh, Mother Nature did this. This is amazing. The laws of the universe brought these little bits of matter together in this perfect and orderly way. And sometimes that's where the wonder ends. Other days it continues into the spirit, the indwelling consciousness, and it takes me deeper. But as long as we are holding space for that sense of wonder and that sense of joy, I think there is potential for magic. Whether we call that conversing with the spirit in stone, or whether we, lay them on a chakra or a specific point on the body for healing, or wear them as a metaphor or symbol for the energy we need in a day, it's going to manifest differently for all of us. And what I strive for is to help us find common ground in that universal human experience of finding meaning in the mineral world.
I think there's have you seen in your practice, I know there are certain stones that I'm more drawn to, or that I can communicate with, resonate with more easily than others. And sometimes it'll be all the same type of stones that are formed in the same way, stones that have similar inclusions. That maybe that's a metal or another mineral that works with me on a spiritual level. Have you noticed? I'm a big picture person, and I like to look at all the patterns, which can be problematic when I want to dig very deeply. Um, but have you noticed in your teaching and in your experiences with healing and working with humans and crystals in relationship, have you noticed some patterns of certain stones, that the process of the creation of the stones resonating with a particular type of healing or a particular type of person needs to work with that particular type of stone? Does that make sense? I'm starting to sound crazy in my own head.
Not at all. So here's the thing. When the data set is big enough, patterns emerge. Hopefully, at least that's the goal with data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, and those are the kinds of the things I contemplate a lot these days. And when I was in college, I started to do a deeper dive into, we'll say, crystal healing literature. I'm a big historiography kind of guy. I want to know, like, why do we think the things we think, and where do those ideas come from? And the best place to do that is to look at the written record. And I found some really astonishing things. You could find a copy of a manuscript published in modern English that was from the medieval period in Spain, or the classical period in Greece. And there's certainly signs of cross-pollination. Ideas are spread and disseminated, but there's also new and original information. And then you look at texts from the modern metaphysical, the New Age movement, especially here in North America, people who didn't read these kind of classic and medieval works. And you'll find rocks that are rich in iron, kind of described in similar terms, or minerals that are formed by igneous activity as primary minerals, kind of discussed in some major themes that relate to one another. And I started to compare that to my own personal experiences, because at the time I was working for an earth science museum as the preparator for one of the largest mineral collections in the southeastern United States, as a student at Stetson University. And, kind of sitting down to have that real UPG kind of moment, the unverified personal gnosis, with, like, what does this energy do for me? How does it show up in my life? What therapeutic effect can I observe by meditating with or working with this mineral? And then looking up its geology and seeing the same patterns, like, oh wow, this is a mineral that I didn't know was an iron sulfide, and it behaves very similarly to the way all the great crystal healing people talk about iron oxides. Or iron carbonate. And maybe there's something to this. Maybe there's a common theme with iron, or maybe there's a common theme with carbonate minerals or silicate minerals or hexagonal minerals. And that was kind of something that was really pivotal to my early work, because it kind of laid a foundation for the way I approach understanding the energy of rocks and minerals today. And then, as far as, like, certain people being drawn to certain minerals time and time again, oh yeah, I have a friend who, like, manganese shows up in mineral kingdom for her in so many ways. She'll discover something new. She's like, Nicholas, what is this rock? And I'll ID it for her, and she goes, does it, And I'm like, yes, it does. This one's manganese carbonate. And we'll do that kind of thing. Another friend that it's Madagascar minerals. Doesn't matter what species, but if it's from Madagascar, it just awakens this deep connection to her that she can't identify in a rational, logical, conscious mind kind of sense. But definitely, I think there are energies out there that we are predisposed to being in sync with. But some food for thought is that some of our biggest teachers are the ones that feel kind of antithetical to that. Sometimes the bigger lessons come from the rocks that make us want to, like, run and hide. Like, no, thank you. I don't need this in my life. It's pretty. I'll put it on a shelf. I'm never going to put that in my pocket. I'm not saying you have to, but maybe explore why. Maybe find, like, 10 minutes out of your day when you're in your quiet space where you can reset afterwards and just get to know it 5 or 10 minutes at a time over a long period of time. And then maybe that'll catalyze something. Maybe that's where the deeper healing resides. Sometimes the minerals that we feel so in sync with represent lessons our soul has already mastered. And those that feel a little bit more uncomfortable can signify the deeper metaphors and the deeper messages that we might need to integrate at the soul level.
You see that throughout occultism, because that sounds like exactly how I would describe planets in astrology. And which is interesting, because all of the minerals of the planets are related to, the minerals of the stones are related to different various planets, and they've shown to have some of the same mineral elements that those planets are actually structurally made from, which I think is fascinating and off topic a little bit. But back to what you're saying, no, I absolutely agree. I've been sort of hounded by spirit allies that I didn't want to work. And there's been a few mineral allies that are sort of chasey like that. But for the most part, they just are obstinately there when you turn. So I've had that experience, and definitely had the experience of, trying to run away from lessons that I actually needed because it was a frictitious, is that a word? Let's make it a word. There was a friction there that I needed to digest. There was something I needed to digest from that. So I think it's interesting too, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it's interesting. So obviously minerals cycle like everything else in our universe that we know of. And as we're breaking down as humans, as organic matter, eventually our bones and things like that join in with that rock cycle. Do you feel like there's ancestral ties to working with stones? Because a lot of ways it sort of feels like a similar resonance, you know?
Yeah, a symbol that keeps coming back to me time and time again is some like theoretical research that was done on the origin of nucleotide bases, the fundamental building blocks of our DNA, of all DNA. And it is hypothesized that the first nucleotides emerged from a type of clay mineral with these tiny, tiny little particles that in the primordial goo of planet Earth at the time would collide against each other as sediments moved around and recombine and create new kind of like lattice structures and divide and recombine and divide and recombine. And eventually that became the building blocks for the first primordial life. And how many symbols and myths do we have around the world of the first humans being made out of dirt or soil or clay? And it might turn out that all life is descended from clay. Clays are the result usually of like sedimentation. They're breaking down the chemical weathering of old rocks. They are the decomposed bits of rocks already kind of representing that ancestral energy. I find that most secondary or sedimentary rocks and minerals have this kind of ancestral energy to them to start with. But then to imagine that those prototypes for RNA and DNA literally came from little bits of sedimentary rock, it builds a sense of continuity that there is an order of development, an order of progression, maybe not a hierarchical kind of evolution, saying that we are better than, greater than, higher than, more evolved than the mineral kingdom, but that we are interconnected with it. And it just kind of highlights how you can't really do anything on Earth and be away from the mineral kingdom. You talked a little bit earlier about this idea of the divide between the material and the divine, the human and the natural, but it's all natural, it's all divine. Everything around us ultimately is derived from some byproduct of nature that we've extracted in some way. A buzzword I use a lot when talking, or phrase rather, that I use a lot when I'm talking about like the ethics of crystal mining, is the expression, if it isn't grown, it's mined. So, I mean, look at the space around you. The drywall in your walls is made of gypsum, which is just the not so pretty version of selenite. The electricity that's powering our devices is delivered by copper wires refined from copper ores, which have crystalline structures. The windows in my office here are made from like potassium rich feldspars and other silicate minerals. There's nothing around me that isn't somehow connected to the mineral kingdom. You could subtract every rock and mineral and fossil and gemstone from my collection, from this building, and I would still be surrounded by things that are mineral in origin. And if we recognize the imprint of the mineral world in our everyday life, we recognize that it's not a long and ancient connection that has been severed by the consumer material kind of capitalist worldview we live in, where we feel ourselves separate from nature. It's just living on in different ways. The very first tools, implements, pigments, shelters were rock.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still doing it. It's just a lot more refined. It's just a lot more prettified, if you will. But we're still connected so intimately. And the stuff that my body is made from comes in part from the mineral kingdom. And it's right there. Our bodies are crystalline. We share a lot of similarities with the gems in our collection, at least some kind of a high level cursory fashion. So yeah, there's definitely an ancestral link, and I think the slowness at which the mineral kingdom changes helps us slow down and appreciate the passage of time, and recognize the inertia of tradition, inertia of the ages, and definitely connects us to the past, because even the most humble tumbled piece of quartz that we might tuck into our pocket is truly ancient by human standards, and it just gives us that link to ancient days.
That feels, that resonates on a lot of levels, just feeling like literally part of that cycle as well. And I mean, even in the food we eat, even if we're the plants that we eat, you know, they're drawing minerals out of the soil. Um, Everything we create iron in our blood, you know, like our bones do that work, you know, we're not separated in any way. And I hadn't thought about the materials, you know, outside of brick and stone and things like that, um, being so being so surrounded by, still living in our stone houses. um I gotta sit with this a minute. Yeah, wow. And then eventually we'll go back to that, you know, as we return to the earth in whatever form we return. Hmm, interesting.
Yeah, they enrich us, we enrich them. It's a cycle.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful to feel and to be able to confirm some of these things, because a lot of this stuff, you know, we say the ancients knew. We don't know what the ancients knew. We assume the ancients knew. Um, they recognized that connections. They recognized stone brothers and plant brothers and things like that in a way that we can literally, you know, take a microscope and look at the structures and say this and that are the same, you know. But they knew that from the relationship, you know, with the earth, from that intimate communication, direct communication with the stones and minerals that they were exposed to.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some cultures that are separated by not just great spaces in the geographical sense, but great expanses of time. And obsidian mirrors are a wonderful example of how you've got, relatively late in human history, the production of obsidian mirrors in Central America, people like that, Aztecs, for example. I mean, in some cases, less than a few hundred years ago. And they certainly had no connection to, communication with, collaboration with the people who lived in Çatalhöyük in the Anatolian Peninsula of modern day, like Turkey, who made obsidian mirrors many, many, many thousands of years ago. There's something about the nature of obsidian and the human connection to it that arrives at the same kind of artifact, the same kind of use that is prototypic or archetypal in some way. And that's just one example of many. If you look at the imagery related to emeralds, or most green stones, because that's all emerald once meant. The modern day word comes from smaragdos in Greek, which just meant a green rock. The attribution of power of mystical gifts, curative properties to obsidian is certainly wide, or to emerald, is really widespread from culture to culture, place to place, even down to mythic origins that seem really similar in the indigenous people of Central and South America compared to people in the Near East. And it's just amazing that connecting to the same rock or mineral or gem can achieve similar end results. And it gives me a sense of comfort and hope that maybe, just maybe, I'm not crazy. I'm not making it all up. And there is some sort of objective truth out there. And so long as I live in a relative world, I can't perfectly express the absolute. So it has to become relative. It has to become personal. It has to be relational. And when our data set is big enough, when we see enough people engaging the same work, those patterns almost always emerge.
See, and you've just circled us right back around. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, so what are you working with right now? What is the stone that your focus is on right now?
Oh, this is a really good question. So there are a handful of things. I have been on a massive citrine kick for months now, and that's not going to change anytime soon. It just seems like it's a really timely healer for some of the stuff that my mind, body, and spirit are going through. Another one that we'll say, relearning my appreciation for is turquoise. It's a gem I don't have a lot of in my collection, but it was one of the first true gemstones, not just a rock or a mineral, but true gem that I fell in love with because my grandmother collected Native American turquoise jewelry. She had lots of vintage stuff, and she kept it kind of like carefully wrapped in socks and plastic bags in a little ancient camera bag in the top drawer of her dresser. And on visits to my grandparents, I would like beg and plead, can I please see your turquoise jewelry? And she'd just let me have at it. And every one felt like a magical amulet in some way. And I could sit there for like hours just trying on every ring or putting on every necklace or pendant one at a time, and just inspecting the stones. So I'm kind of diving back into my love of turquoise. I really love copper-based minerals, and that's a copper phosphate mineral. And I'm eager to kind of see it through new eyes as I get there. I just treated myself to my first new piece of turquoise in years. So I'm going to sit down and get to know it as if for the first time, I hope.
You know, I have similar stories of my grandmother also had a turquoise collection. Um, I just assume everybody's grandmother did. And I was drawn to turquoise as a young person, but I haven't actually reconnected with it as an adult. Um, I don't know why. I guess because I kind of feel like it's everywhere, and I'm one of those people that waits until it's not popular, and then I'm interested after it's not cool anymore. So I'm still waiting. Let me know how it goes with turquoise. What are some of the things that you're discovering in your falling in love again with turquoise?
Well, one of the sort of universal imagery sets that surrounds it, whether it's rooted in indigenous tradition here or in the Near East, where there were also mines in the ancient world, it's definitely associated with themes of like sky, land, water, because it comes in more than just that perfect turquoise blue. You find greenish and brownish varieties that are maybe less popular, but the colors and patterns of turquoise are deeply entrenched with the same colors and patterns we see in the world around us. So it definitely feels like it's trying to get us in sync or invite us to return to harmony with the natural world. A lot of it, when we look, like one cool thing about turquoise is that the patterns on it, the textures, the veins, all that fun stuff is kind of like a fingerprint that is unique to the area it comes from. But so many varieties of turquoise have a kind of netting or webbing on them that almost look like scales, and that kind of reptilian or serpentine imagery is also associated with the earth. It's a copper-based stone. Copper is the metal in alchemy, associated with Venus, which is, of course, a gloss for the Great Mother, the Divine Feminine. So I see these kind of layers of symbolism that connect it to the Divine Feminine. It's something I've written kind of a small amount about in cursory fashion for my book, Stones of the Goddess, but I want to go way deeper than that with learning about the formation process and other things that I've just never really dived into. So that's my kind of ongoing research project, and I'll present all that when I do a master class on it sometime in December.
Oh wow, that's coming up soon.
It is.
You've got your work cut out for you.
Always, always.
Always. So you said you've been working with citrine for the past few months. Tell me how's that going for you?
I think citrine is a stone that collectively, like the human race, just doesn't know well enough, because most of what we see isn't like proper citrine, at least not to a geologist, maybe to a gemologist, but this is a case where two related professions that study more or less similar substances can still have different definitions for things. So to a gemologist, citrine just needs to be yellowish quartz. It can range from reddish gold to a greeny yellow. A geologist would prefer to define it as being a naturally occurring variety of quartz, and then might even narrowly define its source of color, what we call the chromophore, the tiny little trace element that's responsible for the color. So given that so much of what we see on the market is actually heat-treated citrine, as well as gamma-irradiated quartz, and other forms of quartz that have undergone some kind of treatment, I've really committed myself to getting to know the natural versions of citrine. And one of the things I really love is this new material that's coming out of Zambia. It's only been out for several years now, and it's actually mined as gem quality rough. They don't care about getting crystals out intact. So when you get ones that have terminations like this, they are kind of a big deal, and they're usually a lot pricier because someone's got to do the work of sorting through tonnage of rough to pick out the best points and get those to the people who care about the points being intact rather than just selling it as jewelry rough. But it feels like it's this precious gift that Mother Earth has given us to give us access to what is, for all intents and purposes, one of the rarer varieties of natural quartz. And I think that citrine is really timely because it focuses on themes of release, letting go. It strengthens the ability for body, mind, and spirit to eliminate the things we've accumulated.
Mm.
So in gemstone therapy, we might work with organs of elimination, like the lungs, the bladder, the liver, the kidneys, the large intestine, the skin. But also, if we are pack rats, maybe we would use it to learn to make space and eliminate clutter. Or if you can't let go of that thing that Cheryl said in the office last Wednesday, like that's another case where citrine's ability to eliminate, to let go, comes in. And as we make space, there's room to be filled up, because I'm sure we've all heard the idiom that the universe abhors a vacuum. So as we have that space that we make within us, that inner spaciousness, we are empty vessels that can be filled with all the good stuff. So we often get reductive about what citrine does. We call it a stone of abundance, or stone for prosperity, or wealth, or the merchant stone. It goes by a lot of little epithets like that. But it does so much more than help us accumulate wealth. It's really about learning to be the vessel through which abundance in all its forms flow. That could be a material sense, a financial sense. It could be an abundance of support, love, connection. It could be an abundance of health. The tension that holds old patterns in place needs to be released in order to allow the body space to heal. How much of our well-being is strongly influenced by stress and tension in many ways, whether that's physical, psychological, spiritual. It can originate at any of those levels, and citrine slowly works to unwind that tension, to dissolve the the
The
the yeah,
obstacles that are preventing that flow. Oh, wow.
totally. So it's really about fulfilling your highest potential, and less so about manifesting abundance. But if you are fulfilling your highest potential, abundance is a piece of that. And how we define it is relative to our experience. So if we get that dazzling piece of citrine and we do the work with it, and we don't wake up with $10 million in our bank overnight, like, what other ways has abundance shown up for us? What other ways have we learned to let go, to make space for the good in our lives? That's what citrine's here to help us with.
That's definitely a different perspective than, what I've heard on the surface of working with citrine. I've definitely heard that it's a stone, of the sun. It's very, it's a stone of cheerful and, bringing in, it's like a stone of good luck and that sort of thing. But I've not heard about how the process works to give you the space for that. So that's a very different process of working with a particular stone. So I'm going to have to get my citrines out. Yes, I will. I will have to get my citrines out. It's interesting. When I was in seminary, part of our work was to choose a stone for the work of our lessons with each of the zodiac. We were working through the whole year, working with each zodiac and the astrological archetypes and things like that. And so I had citrine for working with Leo.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's a lot of layers there of getting out of your own way, which I think is kind of a hang up with Leo in general. Um, so yeah, I think I'm gonna have to revisit my experience with that. So I'll ask you about one more stone, and then I want to switch gears to your most recent work that's coming out. I'm gonna ask you about one more stone, and this is pure selfishness on my part because it's my favorite.
Go for it.
So this is probably everybody's favorite because it's beautiful. So tell me about lapis lazuli, the blue. It's my favorite. I love it. And there's probably so many out there that are just dyed, and I don't like that, but you go.
Yeah, it's a common practice. Enhancing gemstones is nothing new. Gemstone enhancements and fakes and forgeries have been going on for thousands of years. You can read cuneiform texts from like Babylon, Mesopotamia, Sumer, and they tell you how to identify treated and faked stones. So sure, sometimes lapis is wearing a little bit of makeup. It wouldn't be my first
Aren't we
choice.
all?
Yeah, it wouldn't be my first choice for therapeutic work, but if you want to appreciate the aesthetic value of a stone, use the tools you got. So, nothing inherently wrong with that. But as far as lapis is not a single mineral, but it is a rock. So a mineral is defined as a naturally occurring inorganic substance with a crystal structure, which means it has the same composition throughout and a repeating symmetrical structure throughout. When we have a rock, on the other hand, we have an aggregate of one or more minerals that have come together. And so that means that the overall composition of the substance can be variable because it's a mixture of things. It's like, a scoop of Lucky Charms. We know that it has flakes and marshmallows, but the amount of marshmallows in the spoonful is going to be different each time. So that's kind of like the difference between a rock and a mineral. So lapis is made out of three primary things, but it can have as many as a dozen to 20 different accessory minerals that we might not even see with the naked eye. So there's three big ingredients. The bright blue comes from lazurite, which is in the sodalite group. It's distantly related to sodalite. It is not sodalite proper, but it shares a lot of, we'll say, structural and chemical themes. We've got the little golden flecks from pyrite, an iron sulfide mineral. And then we will often see bands, veins, wisps of white calcite. But even when we have a piece that's solid blue, there's actually interstitial calcite that's holding together all the microcrystals of lazurite together. So lapis, we often talk about it as being a good stone for psychic development. It was like one of the most important stones that Edgar Cayce channeled information about in his era, which kind of shows some continuity of it having been a big deal. When fewer rocks were available on the market, this was a pretty exotic thing, pretty rare thing to have, sourced from only a few places on Earth. So there's a sense of prestige and power that comes with rarity, and that certainly hasn't changed, even though there's a lot more of it on the market, thanks to advances in mining and extraction technology and the global gem trade. But we still see a lot of those same themes coming through. And since it's blue, our modern Western chakra system, which uses this sort of Reiki Biv spectrum on the chakras, people want to attribute it maybe to the throat chakra, or if it's a darker blue, maybe to the third eye. And those correspondences work, but it's very surface level. If we look at the deeper function of how this rock formed, what it's made from, what it's meant to do in our lives, one of its chief goals is to harmonize our heart and our mind. So Western chakra model, it's blue, it's for the throat chakra, we're going to use it for communication. Deeper mechanism. It harmonizes our heart and mind. It removes a sense of internal conflict and leads us to a space of personal mastery. Now, if there's no inner conflict between head and heart, if we recognize that they are part of a greater whole rather than separate entities that might be at war with one another, like we train them to be here in Western culture, it is much easier to express your ideas because there's only one of you expressing them. You don't have an intellectual self separate from your emotional sense. Your psyche isn't split in that way. So the side effect of this stone doing its mission is better communication. The side effect of this stone doing its mission is enhanced intuition and psychic development, because again, when you have that space inside made by being totally aligned, heart and mind, then you can be a better vessel. It also encourages us to do the self-reflection to get to the root. Like, where did I interrupt my connection with the heavens? If we look at the stone, it resembles the night sky, dark blue, littered with stars. And it reminds us that this really humble substance, it used to be limestone at the bottom of an ancient sea. Even before that, it was the remains of living organisms that eventually compressed into limestone. And the moving of plates, tectonic plates, the making of mountains literally took the stuff from the very bottom of the ocean to some of the tallest peaks of the world, and it has been thrust heavenward, and in the process of that evolution began to resemble the stars themselves. And there's this kind of humility that comes from recognizing we're made out of the same stuff as the earth, but then there's this expansiveness that comes at recognizing that we're also made out of the same stuff as the stars. We are the heavens embodied. We are the divine incarnate. And this is a stone that reminds us of that. And when we get to that space, of course, we have a sense of inner harmony. We have a sense of mastery. We are in the flow of communication with our guides or our team in spirit or whoever it is that we work with. And it gives us that perspective, that bird's eye view, where we're in the heavens looking down rather than lost in the thick of it. And it's just so magical for that reason.
You're making me have tears. I'm trying not to have mascara running down my face, but it could happen. That's absolutely beautiful. Yeah, I'm going to definitely sit down and have a deeper conversation with my lapis as well. So I'm imagining that depending on what other sorts of minerals are making up your specific lapis, there could that speaking to you, there could be all additional filters on those lessons and additional things coming through. So, gosh, you'd really have to know your stuff. You'd have to go to mineral college and learn all of the different, learn to recognize all the different elements that are in there, or I guess just talk to it and see what it has to say to you. That's the cheaper way.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to it. I mean, the truth is that unless you're cutting these tiny wafer thin sections and looking at them under powerful magnification with polarized light, you're never going to be identifiable, all the stuff that's in there, because they're just too small to be seen with the naked eye. But we are fundamentally similar and fundamentally made out of similar stuff, and yet we still express different personalities. And it's the same with our rocks. Differences that we might not be able to assess unaided optically with just our eyes are still going to be present vibrationally. At heart, I'm an animist. I recognize the individual spirits of the stones and want to coordinate and collaborate with them. So sit down and talk to your rocks, and more importantly, listen to your rocks. And they might not talk with words, but you might see them showing up in feelings or impressions or emotions that kind of stir when you work with a particular stone or any stone. And that's a really important place to turn to for clues as to what it has to offer you.
Well, thank you. That's really excellent advice. So let's talk about your most recent book. Your most recent book is Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden. Is it out yet? I think it's still in pre-order, right?
Still on pre-order. It'll be out in spring. The publishing industry is kind of seeing some delays, so the exact date it's going to reach market is we're going to say flexible, but probably toward the end of March, early April is what we're anticipating.
So tell me how you got from you've got the majority of your work so far has been about working with stones and crystals. So how do we go from there to flower essences?
It's kind of a long, slow shift. I have worked with flower essences for about half my life. That's maybe 17, 18 years now. They on and off, not always continuous, but there have been windows where I've used them really hardcore and windows where I haven't. And a few years back, I started to get really kind of enchanted with getting to know the flora of my own landscape here in Central Florida. And I really thought I was going to try to take like the ethnobotany route and get to know the historic uses and spiritual meaning and other significance related to plants, and kind of channel that into a more magical, conventional herbalism kind of route. And that just it never got off the ground. I liked the idea, but I never did anything with it. And one day I was reading um, a book on. I bought it for its section on gemstone essences, and I just open up to a page, and the author is describing how she makes her plant essences too. And I'm like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do with native plants. I'm going to make essences from them and get to know them that way. And that just like opened up a whole new door for me. And it was just kind of something I did, teach an odd workshop here or there, work with some friends or clients every now and then. And then a couple of years ago, I took this trip to England with my partner, and I got to teach a series of workshops as part of a retreat in Glastonbury at Chalicewell Gardens. And one of my treats to myself for a job well done was buying a little kit of essences that they make at Chalicewell, and then having to wait, almost a couple weeks until we got back home to crack open these little bottles. So I wanted them to stay sealed for transit and get to know those essences was like so much fun. And then it rekindled this love that I had for working with them in the past. And I started to incorporate the ones that I'd made and adding more to my collection. I work with essences from a lot of different makers. I won't tell you how many strange little bottles full of clear liquid there are sitting around the house. And and I recognized that, if I would be doing ritual work that called for a particular plant ally and I didn't have the powdered bark or the root or the resin from it, and I had a flower essence made from the same plant, I could use that in my work. I can also thank Christopher Penczak for inspiring some of this. He teaches a class on baneful plant essences that I've taken a couple times now, um, and definitely in the Temple of Witchcraft's literature and mystery school, we work with essences. So there was some inspiration there to kind of continue that and explore ways that were kind of unconventional with working with them. And then I thought, all right, I bet there's a book in this somewhere. I bet I could just like write a book on flower essences from a magical perspective and see what's going to happen. And so I did one day, and the title just came to me while taking a shower, of course, before heading to
Of
work.
course.
Yeah, I was a few weeks into the real start of the pandemic. Um, and my schedule looked different, at least for the first few weeks of that. I wasn't customer facing. I had shorter hours. I was doing a little bit more remote work, so I could spend more time in the office doing that. And in a span of 9 months, I wrote this like gargantuan book. It's over 500 pages. I've never written anything so big, and with so few photos, so I can't blame it on the pictures like I do with my encyclopedia
With your crystal books,
collection of
yeah.
crystals. And it kind of emerged as this way to bridge traditional flower essence therapy with magical herbalism and look for the common themes, kind of like I do with rocks. Like, how have we traditionally used this gemstone? What does the ancient lore say about it? What clues do we get about its chemical composition or formation, other things? So with plants, it's the same kind of thing. What does the lore about the plant tell us? What do its medicinal uses tell us? What does its doctrine of signatures, its gesture or
Mm-hmm.
habit or the shape of the flower tell us about that? And if I can kind of trace all that together to tell a contiguous picture, paint a story, then I'm really excited to share that with others. So that's kind of where the book came from, and it's currently still kind of finalizing some typesetting and some proofreading before I get to see the corrected proofs, where I'll be able to make my final changes, and it'll go to the printer sometime before the end of the year, we hope. And then with any luck, it'll be out sometime in March or April.
I'm very excited to read this one. I'm a huge, huge fan of flower essences because I have a large garden, and I, everything that comes up, I'm going to make an essence of it. So I literally have like gallons of flower essences because I bring out the big bowl, and in my brain, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to need this, and it's going to last me for 500 years probably. So I just give them away because I have too much. And, this plant's going to just be back next year. So but I love them. My most of my potions cabinet is full of flower essences and blends of flower essences. So I'm right there with you on a love of working with flower essences, and it's such a I say gentle, but I mean chemically gentle process of sort of connecting with a plant ally and learning the medicine of a plant ally. Because it's not always necessarily gentle internally on your whatever it is that you're looking to change or grow or heal. That's not necessarily always gentle, but chemically they're gentle. So I like that. Yeah. So what are some of the flower essences you're working with now that were really integral to creating this book for you?
Oh, there were a handful. I definitely, with 100 essences in the directory, I can't say that I made myself a little dosage bottle of each one and took it for a course of weeks to see how it was going to manifest. Some of it had to be kind of like quick and dirty meditations, or like I learned about it in courses that I took, because I'm like a perpetual student. I'm always learning other people's approaches. So I've had some amazing flower essence teachers over the past few years, not just Christopher, but I got a chance to study something called Floral Acupuncture, which is topical applications of the Bach flower therapy system, with Deborah Creighton, who's like a genius. My dear friend and mentor Emily Ruff taught a great course that was mostly focused on the Bach remedies, but then we opened up the discussion to native plants in Florida, taking a correspondence course with Sue Lilly from Green Man Tree Essences, and those are all a system entirely of trees, mostly native to Great Britain, but there are some other fun ones they've got in there, and then just more and more and more essences. So some that I found really important for the overall process. Blackberry is one that supports manifestation. It was, fun fact, the very first essence I ever made, and it was not the one I intended to make the day I set out to make one, but it emerged that way. And that's just kind of how blackberries go. They spring out of the ground, and then all of a sudden those bramble arches are reaching out to claw and grab anything to come into form. And so it really helped me kind of carry through with that. I used olive quite a lot for the keeping burnout at bay, writing a massive book while teaching online and doing the publicity thing. I had a new book launch with Crystal Basics around the same time frame that I started this. And then, this little thing called the pandemic happening and having to work with the public during all of that. So I think Olive was a really good ally for me to keep my nose to the grindstone and stay on top of my deadlines as best as possible. Um, I worked a lot with, oh gosh, so many different ones though. I think one of the ones that kind of rooted a lot of my experience was you. You being a poisonous tree. So it's this really powerful ancestral medicine. And I think my love of plants is really well informed by my grandmother, not just my love of turquoise jewelry, but she was an avid gardener. And honestly, if it didn't have flowers, she wasn't really interested in it. Like, it could also produce fruit. That was great. But the great joy of the orange tree in the backyard was the scent of its blossoms, the princess flower tibicina, or bird of paradise with their really, really vivid blooms were things that she just loved. The fact that the French peony could be smelled from like down the block, that was what enchanted her. So um, just being able to connect to that and to recognize that as fundamental and universal as the stone experience is, so is the plant one. Because I guess we could flip the expression: if it isn't mined, it's grown. So whether that's, you know, botanical or animal husbandry, we still have to grow it, we still have to raise it, and they all feed from one another. They're all interconnected. So the flower essence was a nice diversion from the mineral kingdom. It's still a practice I'll probably keep up for the rest of my life because I love it. But this book was a lot of fun because it wasn't the same thing that I always do.
Well, I'm very excited to read it. I've been working mostly the last year, and I think I'm coming close to the end of my current time with it. Has been working with a spider lily essence that I made a gallon of, and I don't. There's a little bit of lore about spider lily as far as how it's used in other countries, like in Japan and things like that. So there's lore there, but it's not native to this area, but they're everywhere. So they were brought over, and now they're absolutely everywhere here. So we don't have a whole lot of lore from this region related to it, but it's been really helpful in just processing a lot of grief and loss and helping to ground and sort of rise up from the situation of this pandemic that we're all experiencing for me. So I received the message in meditation that to make this essence and take it for a year. And I did that, but I'm still taking it because I'm not ready to quit yet. But that it's so interesting to work with what comes up around you. You mentioned blackberries. I have so many blackberry vines. I'm gonna cut them down. Shh. They're just absolutely everywhere. So I've been like cutting the brambles back and making baskets and things like that with it, which make excellent like protection bowls and things like that. So now I'm gonna have to make some essences before I do that. If I chop it back, it'll be back in like 5 minutes anyway. So that's
It's true.
fine. But just paying attention to what's coming up around you and what's in your area is often exactly what you need. You know, that's why it's presenting there. And flower essences are so easy to make and so easy to work with. So I hope that it's interesting because I'm teaching a class this weekend on working with minerals and stone spirits, and flower essences are part of that. So that's exciting.
Very
Um,
nice.
yeah. So this is excellent. So I really want to just give this episode to my students and be like, just listen to him. He knows a lot more than I do. This is what you need. But I'm very excited for this book to come out. And I'll ask you one more question because we've had you for a long time. I know you've got other places to go today. What is the this is my question I ask everybody that comes on the show. What is the future project that you're most excited about? And that doesn't have to be something that's already in the work. It could be something that's just one day I think I'd like to explore, anything, but what really gets you fired up the most for the future?
Oh, I have so many ideas for things, and it's like never enough time in the world. I think one of the projects that I've hinted a lot at and talked a lot about through other things, because it's always been kind of accessory to what I'm doing, is I'd love to explore the motifs related to luminous stones, whether literal stones that glow under the right conditions, or more mythological gemstones, and kind of connect them to a greater body of Lightbringer mythology. And it's like it got to the point where I even several years ago wrote a complete outline for a book that kind of fits into this topic. And then the scope of my life has changed, and the scope of the research has changed, and it includes so much more now that I no longer have a cogent outline that encompasses it all. But when I have an idea, or when I have a moment to daydream about it, or I read or something really, really salacious that's going to feed into it, I'll take some notes and, open up the document in the Google Drive and just word vomit all my ideas together, so that one day I can sit down and write this book. And I think it'll be delightfully esoteric and very occulty, and appeal to maybe a slightly different audience than my average book.
I would love to see that. That sounds absolutely fascinating. And I don't know that I've seen anything like that before. Please do it.
You got it.
Do the thing. Yay. Thank you. Nicholas, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the show. I'm so glad that all of the tech issues have miraculously resolved and we got to actually sit down and have a conversation with you. It's been wonderful. Tell our listeners where they can find you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on the show. You can find me as the Luminous Pearl in most places, whether that's theluminous.pearl.com. Please don't judge my website. I got to pay someone to fix it. I'm at the Luminous Pearl on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok as well. So those are all great places to connect with me. And then I have a big schedule of upcoming events, even into the new year. I've got some stuff planned out that's going to be really fun when I can announce it. So anyone who's interested in attending something online, I do like free monthly online Reiki shares. I do an ongoing series of masterclasses devoted to a single stone each month. And then I have a big and varied list of other offerings that I'll have as the new year rolls out.
Wonderful. Well, I am excited to attend some of those. I've attended a few of them over the years, and I really got to get on top of it. I got to go to them every month because it's absolutely fascinating. And I so appreciate you. And we will, of course, include all of the links to his Instagram, Facebook, website that needs fixing. All of that will be in the show notes, so you can check there. And thank you so much, Nicholas Pearson. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. And blessed be everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you all so much for listening, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe through your favorite podcast provider. It helps us get our podcast in front of more listeners just like you. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can leave us a voicemail by clicking the link in the description of this episode, and you can always find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Crossroads and Cauldrons Podcast.